Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to another review. So in today's review, I want to drop brief impressions of the Stax SR009S. So this is, of course, not exactly the most updated flagship from Stax. Stax has come out with the new one, the X9K, and but this has been Stax's #1 flagship for a long time, and this has, of course, in on HeadFi and among a lot of different user groups of electrostatic headphones. And of course, people who own both electrostatic headphones as well as planar headphones and dynamic driver, this has often been compared to and often been regarded as the #1 headphone in the world. And others have compared it to the Abyss 12665TC and the Susvara and the RAL SR1A. So this does still hold its own in terms of how great it is and how well regarded it is in terms of musical performance, technical performance, and so forth. So in today's review, I just want to take you guys through my impressions of the Stax SR009S. For the sake of a background, I'm coming from a Susvara and an Abyss 5TC and an SR1A, and I also have a Stelia. So all these headphones I mentioned I own personally. The Susvara was my first flagship headphone, my first top-of-the-line flagship headphone, and in many ways they called it my first love. That's basically what I'm coming from, so you know that I'm not one of those ESTAD guys, so to speak, and there's nothing wrong with being an ESTAD person. And there are people who just love these stat sounds so much that they can't go for anything else. I sort of understand why, although I don't see myself becoming an ESTAT guy and only an ESTAT person. I do think there's value in having an ESTAT. So I'll be taking you guys through my impressions of this headphone. And first of all, a caveat, a disclaimer in terms of where this comes from and so forth. So this comes from Stax in Hong Kong, bought with my own money. I also have a very powerful and a wonderful amplifier to pair with it. I'll drop images of that amplifier on the Amplify thread. So you can find links to that thread on this video description, or you can just go to HeadFi and search for Amplify. So I just want to talk a bit of the amplifier first. So the amplifier is called KG-SS HV Carbon. It's right there, and it's built by Miroslav in Sweden. Of course, there are other manufacturers who can build you one of these stats, ESTAT amplifiers, but I decided to go for this because the KG-SS HV Carbon was tuned in mind with the SR009, which is the earlier version of this. So without further ado, just to jump into the brief discussions of technicalities and tonality and so forth, and of course its build and comfort. It's supremely comfortable, guys. I just love wearing this headphone. This headband is flip-flopping a bit because I got a demo version. Some people say that it doesn't feel very premium to justify the $4,500 price, but I've seen worse. I've seen far worse. It's very comfortable. It's light. The clamp force is very manageable. The pads are very, very comfortable. So I have no complaints about the comfort. The build is what it is. It's a Stax. And of course, the new carbon that Odyssey has come out with is supposed to be better built, and I would love to try it sometime. And the headphones like the Abyss 5TC is, of course, much better built. But I don't mind. I mean, I have used a lot of HIFIMAN headphones, so I'm used to sort of headphones that perhaps creak and make all kinds of noises and don't look very premium. But this is fine in my eyes. I don't look at it when I'm listening to it. So that's it for aesthetics, build, and comfort. In terms of the tonality, this is something that's interesting. I think it sounds a lot like the Susvaras. The Susvaras to me sound very liquid, sound very organic, and sound very mid-range first sort of a headphone. Susvara, for example, when I listen to the Susvara, I hear the mid-range very prominently, and I hear a lot of the air frequencies very prominently. And I say this only in comparison to other headphones I have, because if the Susvara was my only headphone, I would have said that it's a complete headphone, I think, and I would have said that it's an all-encompassing headphone, and I would have said that it is a perfectly neutral, or not a perfectly neutral, but a very neutral and a very well-balanced headphone. But I think once you've tried a Susvara and A/B'd it with an SR1A or an SR009S or an Abyss 5TC, you start noticing other parts of the frequency spectrum that perhaps are not as prominent on Susvara. So in many ways, I think this is a more neutral headphone. It's less upper mid-range forward than a Susvara. Tonality-wise, I would say that it's, like I said, it's a more neutral headphone. The bass is absolutely fine. So a lot of you might have heard rumors and stories and actual stories of how ESTAT headphones don't have a very impactful bass. But honestly, guys, what I've learned, and I'm from one of those top of the line planar sort of universe, right? And I want to say that Of course, a TC and a Susvara are going to be very chain dependent. So the DAC, you have it in front of you, and the amplifier you amplify it with, a speaker amp in the case of Susvara, and many powerful amps in the case of a TC, will greatly change a Susvara or a TC's character. Now, I want to say that this is even more true for an SR009S because I've tried this of different rigs, and the difference is substantial. For example, I have at home a Holo Audio Maydac, which is an R2R DAC, slightly warm, and I have, like I said, the KG SSHV Carbon, which was built to pair with this and its younger brother, the 009. Now, off my chain, it sounds, there's no treble peakiness and there's no lack of bass on the SR009. In fact, I think the bass is absolutely fine. It's enjoyable. Mid-range is absolutely nice. It's slightly recessed, and overall, with the SR009S, it's not recessed like the TC is recessed. It's recessed in the sense that there's a sense of stage, and it's not just because of tonality. I think there's also something going on which gives the SR009S one of the deepest stages I've ever come across. But just to finish up on tonality, I think it's fairly neutral. You hear all parts of the frequency spectrum very evenly. And I don't want to keep dwelling on the comparison with the Susvara because I'll have another video out where I do a shootout of all major headphones that I own: the Susvara, the SR009S, the SR1A, the Abyss TC, and the LCD5, which is coming in. So I want to save the comparisons for that video. That said, this is a more neutral headphone than the Susvara, I think. I'm just using Susvara as a benchmark, where you sort of get, you are able to focus attention on all parts of the frequency spectrum, I think, equally. The mid-range is liquid, it's organic, it's nice, vocals sound wonderful, instruments sound real. The bass is not wanting of the KG SSHV Carbon. I just want to mention that. And it's not bright at all. In fact, it's less bright to my ears than the Susvara is, both because I think there's less of a peak in the air frequencies, and the mid-range is not as forward. The upper mid-range is not as forward. And if you A-beam between this and the Susvara, sometimes I feel the Susvara upper mid-range can be a bit too forward. Now, it's all A-B comparisons, guys. And of course, if one or the other is your only headphone, you're going to see things differently. You have to understand that comparisons are, as Squirrel Wang says, evil, because, it does make, give you a very different take and judgment on different headphones. So that's it for tonality. No problems with tonality, wonderful tonality, great bass, great treble, great mid-range. Now, technical performance. The detail retrieval on this is phenomenal. It is, to my mind, one of the best headphones that I've ever heard for detail retrieval. I think it rivals anything else that I've heard. The speed is fantastic. Everyone craves about the eStat speed, and it's wonderful. That said, I do think planars have caught up with eStat speed, but more on that later in a different video. Dynamics-wise, in terms of impact and slam and this overall sense of tactility throughout the frequency spectrum, so that's sort of how hard a kick drum sort of hits, or how snappy strings sound. So overall, the sense of tactility, I think the SR009S is fine of the Carbon. It is not as tactile, of course, as, let's say, of TC, but it's fine. It's enjoyable, and soundstage and imaging is interesting. It's sort of, so I feel like the three kinds of soundstage. You have a soundstage where the performance is coming to you from a certain depth, so far from, so it's still sort of, so let's say with the SR009S, for example, the stage sort of appears to me to be such that I hear the performance coming from a distance, right? When I switch to, let's say, Susvara, immediately the performance is brought closer to myself. So the vocals is closer with the Susvara, but with the SR009S, the entire performance sort of shifts back a bit. So there's more depth. And some people love it, and I'm one of those guys. I think that this is sort of the opposite of an intimate experience. However, there are times when the vocals, if they're meant to sound intimate, let's say there was this one track where I think the lead vocals was very close to my ears, and then the background vocals was substantially far, and that distance was beautiful and very memorable. It's not an experience that I've had with any other headphone, which basically means the layering is fantastic. So that's worth keeping in mind. As I was saying, the three kinds of stage, I think. So there's the stage width, which is the HD800S or the HD800, where the width is phenomenal, right? And there's, of course, the stage where the stage is deep. And finally, I think you have certain headphones that give you an out-of-the-head experience. So that is not the SR009S or the Susvara, I think. The only two headphones that have so far given me an out-of-the-head experience are headphones like the TC and the SR1A. That said, it's a very deep stage. It's wonderful. It's people call it holographic, and if you hear this headphone, you'll know exactly what that term means. It's a very holographic sound stage. So it's not out of your head. It's not very wide, but it's very deep, and it's wonderful. Not to say the Susvara doesn't have a deep stage, but this is a deeper stage. Comparisons are inevitable, but I do want to do a more detailed comparison between this headphone and the other flagships I own at a later stage. Imaging wise, imaging is wonderful. There's space between images, which is something I desire. So it's never claustrophobic, it's never congested, and I love that quality. And timbre wise, ESAT timbre is what it is. I've heard other ESATs that have more of an ESAT timbre. So let's say, for instance, the HE1 has a more of an ESAT timbre to me. This feathery, ethereal sort of quality, which I think the SR009S has less of, especially if you've heard a Susvara. Guys, the only reason I keep comparing it with my former favorite headphone, the Susvara, which I have over there, is because they sound very similar. And if you have the option of buying a Susvara with a powerful amp and a SR009S with a powerful amp, I really think you ought to audition both. Because you might prefer one or the other, and there's no right answer here. They're both slightly different signatures, but they're so similar sounding that, it won't matter as much whether it's a planar headphone or an ESAT, as long as you can afford to buy a headphone with the right amp for each of these. Last but not least, I just want to talk about FR. So, a lot of people get scared away by the FR because they have more jaggedy edges in the treble, and they seem to have like all kinds of stuff going on with ESATs. And I just want to encourage you to hear some of these top of the line ESATs with the top of the line amps, because with all due respect to Stax, and Stax is a wonderful company, some of the best amps for these headphones are not Stax amps, in my opinion. And this is, of course, corroborated by a lot of people who have been in the ESAT game longer than I have. Because what happens with the right amp is that you're not going to hear the frequency response, if you know what I mean. Like with my carbon amp, A being with other headphones, which are famously polite in the treble, even though those polite headphones have more less treble spikes and a smoother treble in terms of how they graph, the SR009S has a smoother treble. So what I'm saying is, of the right amp and perhaps the right DAC, you almost get the effect that you'd get with EQ. And with the SR009S, I have to say, is the most polite headphone I own of my rig. More polite than all the other headphones I own. That's it for this review. I hope this was helpful. I really think you guys who haven't heard an ESAT headphone yet and can afford to buy a 009S or a Susvara or a SR1A or an Abyss TC or an LCD5. There's a lot of options out there, and all these are wonderful headphones, but I really think you owe yourself a listen, and before making up your mind on the basis of just frequency response charts or some people's opinion about some headphones being bass light or whatever, or peaky, because I think I've been sort of guilty of that. I've heard the SR009S of different rigs, and they sound very different, guys, which is the reason I keep insisting that the chain matters so much for ESATs. And this is coming from someone who's invested 6 months to find the right amp for Susvara, and I've auditioned 20 or 25 amps before deciding on one speaker amp. Hope this was helpful. Stay subscribed, and subscribe if you haven't. I'll have a lot of these reviews coming up for top of the line headphones. This is not going to be my only review of the SR009S. I do want to give it more time and see how my impressions evolve, and I'll do deeper comparisons between the SR009S and all my headphones. So all that's coming up. Thank you for watching, and stay safe. Bye.